At 03:12 on the morning of November 29, 1944, Commander Joseph Enright pressed his eye against the periscope and looked at something he could not name. It filled the lens, a wall of steel rising out of the black Pacific, longer than anything in his recognition manuals, longer than anything he had ever seen afloat. 1,400 yards away, a warship turned slowly across his line of sight, and for a moment, Enright simply stopped breathing. He was 34 years old, United States Naval Academy, class of 1933, 11 years in uniform, and in all that time, in every patrol he had ever run, he had never sunk a single enemy ship. Oh. Now the largest one in the world was drifting into his crosshairs, and he did not know its name. Within a few hours, more than 1,400 men would be dead, and the greatest warship ever built would be gone beneath the Pacific. And the American at that periscope would not learn what he had truly done for another 5 years. Let us go back. The failure had a name, and the name was Shokaku. 11 months earlier, in November of 1943, Enright commanded a different submarine, USS Dace, a brand new boat, fresh from the shipyard at Groton, Connecticut. His first war patrol, his first command, the kind of assignment every submarine officer in the Pacific dreamed of. New steel, an experienced crew, and a hunting ground thick with Japanese shipping off the coast of Honshu. On the 15th of November, the message came in. Codebreakers had located a target, aircraft carrier Shokaku, steaming south out of Yokosuka. Shokaku was not just any carrier. She had been at Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December. She had fought at Coral Sea, at the Eastern Solomons, at Santa Cruz. She was one of the most decorated carriers in the Imperial Japanese Navy, and any submarine captain who sank her would carry that victory for the rest of his life. Enright did the mathematics. He plotted her course. He moved Dace into position, and he waited, submerged, scanning the empty horizon minute after minute. At 8:30 in the morning, she appeared, a silhouette on the edge of the world that matched the carrier exactly. And then Shokaku zigged. She turned 30 degrees to port, sliding onto a track that would pass 3,000 yards to the east. Too far. A poor shot, a long shot, a shot with little chance of hitting. Enright had two choices. He could stay down and fire from distance and hope, or he could surface, race ahead, and try again. He chose to surface. He chose to reposition. It was the careful decision, the textbook decision. But the sun was coming up. The light was spreading across the water, and a submarine on the surface in daylight is a submarine that dies. The carrier's escorts would see him. His minutes had run out. Enright ordered Daisy to dive, and Shokaku steamed past. Untouched, unaware, a veteran carrier gliding away into the Pacific, never knowing that an American submarine had tracked her for 3 hours and let her go. He surfaced after dark and searched the empty sea. There was nothing. He radioed his report to headquarters. Contact made. Attack aborted. No damage inflicted. The reply came back cold and correct. Acknowledged. Continue patrol. Dace came home to Midway in December. 49 days at sea. One damaged freighter that reached port and was repaired. One carrier tracked and lost. 0 confirmed sinkings. Here is the first thing you should understand about Joseph Enright. No one relieved him of command. No admiral demanded his resignation. No board of inquiry sat in judgment. He relieved himself. On the 12th of December, he sat down and wrote the request in his own hand. He asked to be replaced by an officer who could perform more satisfactorily. He signed his own name to the end of his own career. The request reached the desk of Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of the submarine force in the Pacific. Lockwood granted it in 2 days. Enright was sent to shore, to a desk at the Midway submarine base, and there he stayed for 6 months, processing patrol reports, coordinating repair schedules, assigning logistics, while other men took their boats out into the dark water and came back with victories. And Dace, under her new commander, Dace went out and sank ship after ship after ship. She earned a Presidential Unit citation. The submarine had never been the problem. The problem, everyone agreed, had been the man. In the submarine force of 1944, this was the end. There were more good commanders than there were boats to give them. An officer who failed in command was transferred to a surface ship or a shore station, and his submarine days were finished. That was the rule. That was how it worked. But Enright would not accept it. In June of 1944, he asked for a meeting with the admiral. Just 15 minutes. And in that room, he made his case. His failure on Dace had not come from cowardice. It had come from caution, from following the doctrine too rigidly, from not trusting his own instinct when the moment demanded it. He had learned the lesson. He wanted another boat. Now, here is the second thing you should understand. Charles Lockwood was famous for 2 things. He gave his captains extraordinary freedom to fight as they saw fit. And he removed, without sentiment, any commander who failed to sink ships. This was the man Enright was asking for mercy. This was the last man in the Pacific likely to grant it. And Lockwood said yes. He read the record again. An Annapolis graduate, upper third of his class. 3 years on the battleship Maryland. Submarine qualified in 1936. 8 years beneath the sea before the war even began. No disasters on that record, except for one carrier that got away. Lockwood decided to gamble on the man everyone else had written off. In September of 1944, Commander Joseph Enright took command of USS Archerfish, a Yamato-class submarine that had run 4 war patrols and sunk almost nothing. A frustrated, experienced crew waiting for a captain who would finally take them into a fight. They did not know what was already moving toward them, out beyond the horizon. 300 miles, to the west, in the great naval arsenal at Yokosuka, the Japanese had spent 2 years building a secret. Her story began with a defeat. In June of 1942, at Midway, the Imperial Japanese Navy lost 4 fleet carriers in a single day. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. 4 flight decks gone in hours, and with them the striking heart of the Japanese fleet. Carriers took 3 years to build. Japan did not have 3 years. The Americans were launching new ships faster than the Japanese could sink them. But in a covered slip at Yokosuka sat the answer, half finished. She had been laid down in May of 1940 as a battleship. The third hull of the Yamato-class, the most powerful warships ever built. 72,000 tons, 18-inch guns, armor thick enough to shrug off any gun afloat. Her 2 sisters, Yamato and Musashi, were already at sea. She was to have been the third. After Midway, the naval architects made a decision. They would not finish her as a battleship. They would cut away the great gun turrets and the towering superstructure, and in their place, they would build a flight deck and hangars. A carrier grown on a battleship's spine. The armor would remain. The armored hull would remain. She would carry the striking power of a carrier and the survivability of a fortress. That was the theory. They built her in absolute secrecy. American reconnaissance flights crossed Tokyo Bay again and again, and the slip was always hidden beneath camouflage netting. Intelligence knew the Japanese were building something enormous at Yokosuka. They did not know what. It was not until the 1st of November, 1944, that a lone B-29 flying high over the bay caught her on film during her sea trials. The analysts looked at the photograph and saw a carrier, and then they looked closer and realized her silhouette matched nothing in their files. No known class, no known name. They wrote her down as an unidentified target and moved on, having no idea how large she truly was. They called her Shinano, named for the longest river in Japan, a name reserved for capital ships of the highest importance. She was commissioned on the 19th of November, 1944, under the command of Captain Toshio Abe. And here is the third thing you should understand. She was not ready. The ceremony was brief because there was nothing to celebrate. The watertight doors were unfinished. Gaps still open between the frames and the bulkheads. Critical pumps had never arrived and sat waiting in some warehouse ashore. The crew was raw. Most had never served aboard a carrier in their lives. Abe knew it. He asked for 2 more months to finish fitting her out and to train the men who would sail her. He was refused. American bombers were coming for Tokyo more often now, and Shinano was a target too large and too precious to leave exposed at Yokosuka. She had to be moved west to the naval base at Kure in the sheltered inland sea, where the work could be finished under safer skies. 300 miles, 17 hours of steaming. Abe asked for better weather. He asked for a proper escort, 6 destroyers at least, for a ship her size. He was given 3 Isokaze, Yukikaze, Hamakaze, good ships. Not enough, he protested. He was overruled. On the evening of the 28th of November, 1944, the largest warship ever built cleared the approaches to Tokyo Bay and turned southwest into the dark. Her hangars were empty of fighters. In her cargo holds, she carried 50 rocket-powered suicide bombs, bound for the southern islands, and lashed to her deck were 6 suicide boats. She had never launched an aircraft in anger. She had never fired her guns at an enemy. She was a fortress that was still, in 100 small and fatal ways, a work in progress. Captain Abe ordered the standard anti-submarine pattern, a slow, methodical zigzag. 30 degrees of turn, every 12 minutes, hour after hour into the night. American submarines were known to be working these waters. His briefing had listed 3 contacts in the past week alone. One of them was out there now, off his port quarter, running on the surface in the darkness. At 2048, 60 miles south of Tokyo Bay, the radar operator aboard Archerfish leaned toward his screen and called out 2 contacts to the north. One of them was enormous. Enright ordered flank speed and turned to intercept. He did not know what he was chasing. He did not know its name or its size, or that it had been born from the ashes of Midway and built in secret over 2 long years. He knew only that it was the largest thing he had ever tracked, and that after 11 years and 11 months of failure, it was turning slowly through the water, somewhere ahead of him in the dark. The chase was about to begin. The chase began as mathematics. On the bridge of Archerfish, Enright watched the 2 contacts crawl across the radar screen and began the oldest problem a submarine captain ever faces: speed, bearing, distance. The enemy was making 20 knots. On the surface, in the flat calm of that November night, Archerfish could make barely 20 knots herself. A submarine that can only match her target's speed can never catch it on a straight line. She can only cheat the geometry. So, Enright settled in behind them, 8,000 yards astern, close enough to track, far enough to stay invisible, and he began to study the way they moved. They were zigzagging, that was the key. Every 12 minutes, like the ticking of some great clock, the formation turned. 30 degrees to the left. Then, 12 minutes later, 30 degrees to the right. Back and forth, a slow weaving march down the coast of Japan, meant to throw off exactly the kind of hunter that was now creeping along behind them. Enright timed it. 12 minutes, 30 degrees. 12 minutes, 30 degrees. And in that rhythm, he saw a door beginning to open. Because a zigzag is predictable, and anything predictable can be defeated. Down in the engine room, the diesels were screaming. 4 engines, rated to run all day at 1,600 horsepower each, were being pushed to 1,800. The Chief engineer came to Enright with a warning any captain would recognize. Run them this hard, this long, and something will break. Bearings, pistons, a shaft. The engines were not built to sustain this. Enright heard him out, and then he told him to keep the power on. Missing this target was not a thing he was willing to do. Not this one. Not after Shokaku. So the diesels roared on into the night. Blacks, smoke pouring invisibly into the black sky, the whole boat trembling with the effort. 81 men riding a machine that was tearing itself apart to close a gap of a few hundred yards an hour. And the gap did close. Slowly, cruelly, slowly. 20 3/10 knots against 20 even. A tenth of a mile gained in an hour, then lost, when the enemy turned away, then gained again. It was less like a chase than a long, grinding contest of will, run in total darkness, decided by fractions. But there was a clock inside the clock. Fuel, running at flank speed, burned it 3 times faster than normal. Somewhere past 1 in the morning, Enright checked his reserves and did the harder arithmetic. 6 hours. He had perhaps 6 hours of this before he would have to break off, throttle back, and save what was left to carry his boat home. Push past that line, and Archerfish would run dry in enemy waters, a dead submarine drifting off the coast of Japan. By 7:30 in the morning, it would be decided one way or the other. Victory or the long-defeated crawl, back to base with nothing to show for it but ruined engines. He kept the power on. Now, crossed 300 yards of dark water to the other ship and understand what was happening there. Because the tragedy of that night did not belong only to the hunter. It belonged just as much to the hunted. Aboard Shinano, Captain Abe already knew he was being followed. Not long after 9 o'clock that night, more than an hour and a half before his own lookouts would finally spot the submarine on the surface, Shinano's radar had already picked up Archerfish's signal. Abe knew, long before he could see it, that there was an American boat out there in the dark, pacing him, watching him. But he drew the wrong conclusion, the fatal conclusion. He did not believe he was being stalked by one submarine. He believed he was being stalked by a pack. It was a reasonable fear. The Americans had learned to hunt in coordinated groups, wolf packs, several boats working together, one flushing the target toward the guns of the others. To a captain carrying the most valuable ship in the Imperial Navy, a single shadow on the radar looked like the first wolf of many, sent to fix him in place while the others moved to strike. And so, near 11:15, when the destroyer Isokaze finally spotted Archerfish on the surface and broke from the formation to run it down and kill it, Abe called her back. Think about that. One of his 3 escorts had found the enemy, had turned to attack, had the submarine dead in her sights, and the captain ordered her to return to station, because he was certain the lone submarine was bait, a decoy dangled in front of him to lure an escort away, and open a gap for the rest of the pack to slip through. He would not take it. He would not be tricked. He would hold his formation tight, and he would simply outrun them all, counting on his 2-knot margin of speed to carry him clear before the trap could close. It was a sound plan, built on a careful mind, and it was completely wrong. There was no pack. There was one boat. And by calling Isokaze home, Abe threw away the single best chance anyone aboard Shinano would ever have to save her. But fate was not finished with him yet. Around 11:30, deep in the ship, a bearing on the starboard propeller shaft began to overheat. It was the smallest kind of failure, a bearing running hot. In a ship that had been properly finished and properly trialed, it would have been nothing at all. But nothing on Shinano had been properly finished. Engineering came to the captain with the report, and it carried a price he could not have imagined. To spare the shaft, they had to slow down from 20 knots to 18. 18 knots. That was the exact speed Archerfish could make on the surface. In that single moment, in the space of one turn of a bearing, Shinano's entire advantage evaporated. The 2 knots that were supposed to carry her safely home, the margin Abe had staked his whole strategy upon, was simply gone. He was no longer pulling away from the hunter in the dark. He was tied to it. Enright, 8,000 yards back, watched the gap stop widening, watched it hold, watched it, hour by hour, begin to close. He did not know why the giant had slowed. He did not know about the bearing or the unfinished ship or the captain's fatal certainty about a pack that did not exist. He knew only that the largest ship he had ever seen was no longer outrunning him. The clock kept ticking. 12 minutes, 30 degrees, 12 minutes. And then, near 3 in the morning, the last piece of the trap closed itself. For hours, Enright had been working an old submariner's tactic. The end around, running not directly at the enemy, but past him, out to one side, staying astern and abeam, edging little by little toward a point ahead of the formation. If he could get in front of them, he could stop, submerge, and wait, and let the enemy come to him. But a target making 18 knots is a difficult thing to get in front of, and every mile forward cost fuel he was running out of. He needed the Zigzag to help him. He needed the enemy to turn at the right moment into the trap he was laying. At 2:56 in the morning, the formation turned southwest, straight toward him. Toshio Abe, weaving his ship back and forth to avoid the submarine, had just zigzagged directly into its path. Had he done nothing, had he simply held a straight course and run for home on his 18 knots, he would very likely have slipped away clean. There was no way for Archerfish to force the shot. It was the turning, the careful, doctrinaire, by-the-book turning that delivered the giant to the gun. Enright saw the angle open in front of him like a gift, and he did not hesitate, dive. Archerfish slid beneath the surface, smooth and quiet, ballast tanks flooding, the roar of the diesels dying away into the deep electric hum of the motors. 60 feet down, at periscope depth, Enright raised the scope and looked, and there she was, closing at 18 knots, 5,000 yards, and shrinking. He lowered the scope. There was no need to hold it up and risk a lookout catching the feather of its wake. He knew where the enemy was going now. All he had to do was wait, the boat rigged for silent running. Every fan, every pump, every scrap of machinery that made noise shut down or isolated. The destroyers up above carried sonar, and a single active ping could find them. The men moved on rubber soles, spoke in whispers, then did not speak at all. 81 sailors held in the dark, breathing shallow, listening to the sound of their own hearts and the growing thunder of a giant's propellers coming closer through the water. At 3 o'clock, Enright raised the scope for one quick look, and this time he saw her whole. The long, flat sweep of a flight deck. The island rising off to one side. There were shapes on her deck he could not identify, dark forms he took for aircraft. He could not know they were suicide bombs. He could not know almost anything about this ship. He grabbed a pad and sketched her fast, every line he could capture, because someone at intelligence was going to want to know what, in God's name, he had found out here. At 3:12, she turned again, south, and in turning, she rolled her entire flank into view, her whole vast length laid open broadside. The perfect and unmissable target. A destroyer of her screen passed directly over Archerfish and never knew the submarine was there. Enright brought the boat creeping forward. 2 knots. The range fell away. 2,000 yards, 1,500, 1,400. Any closer, and the escorts would surely find him. He marked his solution. All 6 bow tubes ready. And then he did a thing the book told him not to do. He set the torpedoes to run shallow. 10 feet. The doctrine said 15, 20. Deep enough to strike beneath the waterline and break a ship's back. But Enright had looked at the sheer size of the thing in his periscope, and he had reasoned it through. A ship that large would have anti-torpedo bulges down below, armored blisters built to swallow an explosion. He did not want to hit the armor. He wanted to punch his fish in higher, up where the plating was thinner, up where the sea could pour in through the wounds. And if the torpedoes happened to run deeper than he set them, they would still find her hull. It was his own judgment against the manual, against everything he had been taught. The same instinct he had failed to trust that morning off the coast 11 months and a lifetime ago, when Shokaku slipped away. This time he trusted it. 1,400 yards. The giant filling the lens. His eye pressed to the periscope, his voice level. Joseph Enright gave the order. Fire! Fire! They went out one after another, 8 seconds apart, 6 torpedoes running hot and straight into the dark water. Enright kept his eye welded to the periscope and watched the first white track streak away toward the giant. 45 seconds. He counted them. Then, amidships on the starboard side, a fireball climbed up out of the sea. The sound reached them a heartbeat later, carried through the water and up through the steel of the hull, a deep, booming crack that every man aboard Archerfish felt in his chest. 8 seconds after that, a second column of fire tore open her flank. Then a third, near the stern. Then a fourth, forward. 4 hits. In his last seconds at the periscope, Enright saw the giant already beginning to lean to starboard, wounded and heavy in the water. But there was no time to savor it. Up above, the destroyers had already read the torpedo wakes back to their source and were turning, hunting, and the depth charges were coming. Enright snapped the scope down and gave the order that would either save his boat or crush it. Take her to 400 feet. 400 feet was the limit. Archerfish, a Yamato-class boat, was rated to a test depth of 400 feet, and Enright was taking her right down to that line, to the very edge of what her hull was built to survive, where the sea pressure left no margin for a single mistake. She dropped like a stone, venting air, flooding tanks, plunging down into the black, betting everything that the Japanese had set their charges to explode shallow. She reached the bottom of the dive, and the crew went dead silent. No talking, no movement, just 81 men suspended in the dark, listening. The first charge went off 400 yards away. The next. And the next. 14 of them, over 12 minutes. And not one of them close, because the destroyers were hammering the water where the torpedoes had been fired, and Archerfish was no longer there. She had slipped south and gone deep, and the same cold geometry that killed the giant now saved the men who killed her. At 3:47, the depth charges stopped, and through the hydrophones, in the silence that followed, the sonar operator began to hear the giant die. The groan of failing bulkheads, the shriek of steel tearing against steel, the long, terrible sounds of a ship breaking apart somewhere above and behind them in the dark. He timed it, 47 minutes of it, and then, at last, quiet. Enright believed. The carrier had gone down. He had no way to see it. A submarine at 400 feet is blind. He recorded the time and set his course south and took his boat away from that place. And in his patrol report, he would write that he had sunk a carrier of perhaps 28,000 tons. He was wrong, and he was wrong in a way he could not begin to imagine, because at 5 o'clock that morning, when Enright raised his periscope for one last careful sweep and saw nothing but empty ocean, Shinano was still afloat, still moving south at 18 knots, still, in the mind of the man commanding her, a ship that could be saved. Toshio Abe had made his last mistake, and it was the same one he had made all night. He would not believe how badly he was hurt. 4 torpedoes had opened her starboard side, and they had struck along the worst possible seam, the joint where the waterline armor met the anti-torpedo bulge below, a flaw built into every ship of the Yamato bloodline. Enright's shallow-running fish had found that weakness by design and by luck together. The explosions flooded storerooms and an engine room and a boiler room, killing every man on watch in an instant. And the force of them knocked an iron beam loose that punched a hole clean through into the next boiler room over. And then the unfinished ship began to do what an unfinished ship does. The watertight doors that were never completed let the sea through their gaps. The pumps that never arrived were not there to fight it. The compartments that were never tested for leaks filled one by one, and the water crept from the wounded spaces into spaces that should have been dry, and Shinano began to lean. Damage control did everything men could do. They dragged portable pumps through flooding passageways. They formed bucket lines. They shored the bulkheads with timber and their own backs. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough, because the ship had gone to sea with her defenses half built, and the sea does not wait for a ship to be ready. Abe could have slowed. Slowing would have eased the pressure of the water, forcing its way through her hull. Instead, he ordered her to hold speed, to run for a friendly port, to outrun a second attack that was not coming. And every knot she made drove the sea harder through her broken side. The list grew. 7 degrees, 10, 14. He ordered 1,500 men to gather on the high side of the flight deck, hoping their weight might hold her level. It did nothing. He ordered counterfluting, and by the time he ordered it, it was already too late to matter. Hour by hour, the great ship rolled further over. By 9 in the morning, men could no longer stand on the lower decks. Equipment tore loose and slid crashing into the low bulkheads. And at last, far too late, Toshio Abe accepted the thing he had refused to accept all night. She was lost. He gave the order to abandon ship. The destroyers came in close, and rope ladders went over the tilting flight deck, and men climbed down into the sea. It took 90 minutes to take off those who could be taken off. At 10:57 in the morning on the 29th of November, 1944, the largest warship ever built rolled onto her side and went down, roughly 65 miles off Cape Shiono, into water 4,000 meters deep. 1,435 men went down with her. Captain Toshio Abe stayed on his bridge and rowed her to the bottom. She had been a commissioned warship for 10 days. She had steamed a little over 170 miles from the dock where she was born. She had never launched a plane against the enemy. She had never fired her guns in anger. The greatest carrier the world tour had yet seen, 2 years, and a nation's hopes in the building, was gone, killed by 1 submarine and 6 torpedoes, and the small, unfinished flaws that no one had been given time to fix. And the man who sank her did not know what he had done. Enright brought Archerfish home and made his report, and the intelligence officers listened with polite doubt. A carrier that big could not exist. They had photographed every carrier in the Japanese fleet. Nothing in their files matched the monster he had sketched through his periscope. His executive officer backed him. His lookouts backed him. The sonarman, with his 47 minutes of breaking up noise, backed him. It was not enough. Without a photograph, without a prisoner, they could not confirm it. So they gave him credit for a carrier, type unknown, of about 28,000 tons. He received the Navy Cross. Archerfish received a Presidential Unit Citation. And the true size of what he had done sat unknown in the dark at the bottom of the Pacific and would sit there for 5 more years. It was not until 1949 when American occupation forces finally opened the sealed records of the Imperial Japanese Navy that the truth came up into the light. One line in a ledger of the dead: Shinano, aircraft carrier, commissioned the 19th of November, 1944, sunk the 29th of November, 1944. Cause: torpedo attack by an American submarine. Displacement: some 72,000 tons. A figure so far beyond any carrier then afloat that the analysts had refused to believe it. The position matched. The date matched. The cause matched. Joseph Enright had not sunk a ship of 28,000 tons. He had sunk a warship of roughly 72,000, nearly 3 times what he had claimed. The largest warship ever destroyed by a submarine in the history of the world. That record has stood for 80 years. It stands today. No submarine has ever sunk anything larger, and it is difficult now to imagine one ever will. But be careful what you make of it. It is tempting, at the end of a story like this, to call Enright a hero and leave it there. The truth is harder and better than that. He was a man who had failed and knew it, and had the strange courage to write his own dismissal and mean it. He got a second chance almost no one in the submarine force ever got, from an admiral who almost never gave one. And on that one November night, everything that could break the right way for him did. He made good decisions. The shallow torpedoes, the 6-hour chase, the dive to 400 feet. Those were his, but the giant was delivered to him as much by other men's mistakes as by his own skill. By a ship sent to sea before she was ready. By a captain who saw a wolf pack where there was one lonely boat. By a single hot bearing that stole away the 2 knots that meant survival, and a careful textbook zigzag that turned a great ship straight into the path of the torpedoes. Enright himself understood this better than anyone. He never pretended the night belonged to him alone. The ocean keeps her now. Japanese law protects the wreck as a war grave, and no diver goes down to her. She lies inverted in the deep, her flight deck resting on the seabed. 1,435 men sealed inside her hull, in the cold and the dark, where no light has reached in 80 years. Joseph Enright lived a long life. He commanded other ships, retired a captain, worked on navigation systems, and grew old quietly in Virginia. He died in the year 2000 at the age of 89, and they buried him at Arlington. And submarine men came from all over the country to stand at his grave. Remember him as he was, not a legend, a man. One who failed and asked to be sent away and was given one more chance than he had any right to expect. And, on a black night off the coast of Japan, did not let it slip past him a second time.